Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Friday, the 17th of October. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast right here on ARIRANG TV. It's great that you could join us. I'm Mark Broome. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. Addressing Asian and European leaders in Italy, President Park Geun-hye unveils her ambitious plan to boost tangible connections between the two continents and bring North Korea out of its international isolation. In a move sure to enrage Japan's neighbours, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sends a ritual offering to a controversial war shrine that pays respects to several Class A war criminals. Plus, Korea is going to send a team of medical workers to West Africa to help in the global fight against Ebola. This, as the WHO says, the number of recorded deaths from the virus is set to reach 4,500, with double that figure infected. But we start with President Park's trip to Italy, and the Korean leader has laid out her extremely ambitious vision of developing transportation, technology and even education links between Asia and Europe. She was speaking at the 10th summit of Asia-Europe meeting, this taking place in Milan, and she also promoted her so-called Eurasia initiative that's aimed at helping North Korea become a responsible member of the international community. Our Chae-Yu-sun starts us off.
Addressing some 50 world leaders at the Asia-Europe meeting in Milan Thursday, the Korean president first talked about enhancing the physical link between the two continents. She proposed a global symposium to discuss a rail, land, sea and air transportation and distribution network system across Eurasia. President Park then talked about a digital link, vowing to expand from the Korea-led Trans-Eurasia Information Network, a high-speed connectivity of research and education institutes in more than 50 countries. Lastly, the Korean leader highlighted connecting the two continents' culture and education to increase mutual understanding and to build trust, ultimately solidifying the basis of worldly peace. In that regard, President Park referred to our Eurasia initiative of linking the region, including North Korea, for growth, innovation and peace.
저는 평소 철도를 타고 한반도 남단의 부산을 출발해 북한을 통과해서 유라시아 대륙을 건너 유럽으로 밀라노로 오는 꿈을 키워왔습니다.
She said both Asia and Europe should strengthen efforts in persuading the North to open its doors to the world and change, and that a nuclear-free and peaceful unified peninsula would then become a strong nexus for Eurasia. As the two continents seek to boost cooperation on world issues, the Korean president announced Seoul will step up its part in the global fight against the Ebola outbreak by sending health personnel to the affected regions in West Africa.
또한 한국은 여러 나라로 확산되고 있는 에볼라 바이러스 대응을 위해 인도적 지원을 제공한 데 이어 보건 인력을 파견하기로 결정하였습니다.
On day 2 of the summit, President Park will have an opportunity to speak about issues concerning the Korean peninsula and Korea's contributions to the future of ASEAN. Chae-Yu-sun, ARIRANG News, Milan.
And on the sidelines of that summit there in Milan, President Park held one-on-one meetings with several world leaders, including Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. During those talks, President Park referred to her agreement with Chinese President Xi Jinping back in July that the two countries should try to conclude their bilateral free trade agreement negotiations by the end of the year. They also agreed to work through their differences on the extra sensitive issues of agricultural and fisheries products. On North Korea, President Park asked China to be more actively persuasive to its ally to lay down its nuclear arms. Lee said China fully supports the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Beijing also backed President Park's unification policies and efforts to revive inter-Korean dialogue. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has sent a ritual offering to a very controversial war shrine in a move that's certain to outrage Korea and China. Japan's Kyodo News Agency reports the Japanese leader made the offerings early Friday morning to mark the start of an annual fall festival that runs till Monday. The Yasukuni Shrine honours several Class A war criminals along with millions of Japan's war dead. Visits to the shrine by Japanese leaders always spark very angry reactions in Korea and China, victims of Japan's imperialist aggression. We must remark that those pictures are file pictures, and Abe has not personally paid a visit to the shrine today. Abe has been trying to set up his first meetings with Chinese and South Korean leaders on the sidelines of the upcoming APEC summit in Beijing in November. North Korean state media has come out all guns blazing after rare inter-Korean military talks earlier this week ended without much progress on anything, really. It says the South showed no interest in discussing the main agendas during that meeting. Seoul's defense ministry refutes those claims, saying South Korean officials explained the government's position on issues the North brought up. Our Connie Kim reports.
North Korea has lashed out at South Korea for rejecting its suggestions on ways to improve inter-Korean ties after a handful of military altercations at the border. The North Korea Central News Agency reported Thursday that North Korean officials' proposals about stopping vessels crossing the sensitive maritime border and preventing the flying of anti-Pyongyang leaflets fell on deaf ears during talks earlier this week. The report also bashed Seoul for being reluctant to discuss urgent issues. Following the two Koreas' exchange of fire across the disputed maritime border last week, Pyongyang says it sent 3 letters to South Korea before Seoul agreed to sit down for talks. Also lashing out at the South for sending a lower-level delegation than it sent for Wednesday's talks, Pyongyang accused Seoul of only wanting to discuss the main agendas at planned high-level political talks. Regarding Pyongyang's criticism that Seoul called for a closed-door discussion, South Korea's defense ministry stressed that it was the North that requested the military talks not to be made public. Seoul has already admitted Wednesday's meeting went nowhere, but it has expressed hope about making a breakthrough at the political talks. Earlier this week, Seoul suggested holding that round of talks on October 30th, but the North has yet to respond to the proposal. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
North Korea sees the opportunity to promote its efforts to solve the country's food shortages on UN World Food Day. Pyongyang's state-run newspaper on Thursday called for self-sufficiency in food, saying the problem would never be solved if it puts expectations upon others. It added the North was increasing its agricultural investments and carrying out new measures to improve farm production. North Korea has not received rice or any food aid from South Korea for a few years now. The UN says more than 1/4 of all North Korean children are stunted due to chronic malnutrition. A group of 6 North Korean defectors have been arrested by police in northern Laos. An organization based in that country that supports North Korean defectors says the group was caught at a checkpoint in Luang Namta province while trying to get to the capital of Vientiane. 5 of them are known to be women in their 20s to 40s. The other is a middle-aged man. The activist organization says it believes they all escaped North Korea individually. A South Korean who'd been helping the defectors is calling on the South Korean embassy there to secure their release. Embassy officials say they cannot provide details out of concerns for these defectors' safety. Last May, a group of 9 North Korean youths caught in Laos were deported and later repatriated to North Korea. South Korea and the United States will hold a joint foreign and defense ministers meeting next week on the sidelines of their annual security consultative meeting in Washington. Diplomatic sources say the decision to hold the meeting was made back in April during talks in Seoul between high-level US and South Korean officials. Now, both countries will discuss the timing of the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, as well as their combined defense capability against North Korea. The so-called OPCON transfer is scheduled to take place in late 2015, but both sides are thought to have reached consensus on pushing the date back several years, considering North Korea's continual nuclear and missile threats. The official agenda, however, will not include discussions on deploying a US missile defense system, known as THAAD, to the Korean Peninsula. The World Health Organization says the worldwide death toll is set to surpass 4,500 this week. We're talking about Ebola here, of course, as 4 more people have been placed under Ebola watch in Spain. For a look through this and other global headlines, we're joined by Eunice Kim, who is following the developments that keep coming out by the hour, it seems. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Mark.
So let's begin in Spain. An Air France passenger plane that landed there has been isolated, we are hearing. This after a traveller on board that came from an Ebola-affected country showed signs of a high fever.
Right, Mark. That passenger was traveling from Nigeria via Paris and was promptly whisked away by an ambulance with a driver in protective gear to a hospital in Madrid. All the other passengers on the Air France flight were allowed to disembark, though the plane was isolated for disinfection. Now, the 3 others placed under observation on Thursday were a missionary priest and a Red Cross worker who had recently returned from Liberia and Sierra Leone, respectively, and a person who had come into contact with infected Spanish nursing assistant Teresa Romero before she was hospitalized early last week. Meanwhile, in Geneva, the World Health Organization is preparing a checklist of standards and practices that all countries should follow to help contain the hemorrhagic virus. It also identified 14 African countries where preparedness was a priority to prevent Ebola's spread. And new this morning, Hong Kong police have cleared out the protest site in the Mong Kok district, removing barricades, then using cranes to clear out tents and other items scattered along the roads. It was around 5 o'clock Friday morning local time when its police superintendent warned of the imminent roadblock removal. Within 2 hours, the streets were reopened to traffic. This as embattled leader C.Y. Leung on Thursday had said he's ready to restart talks with student leaders as early as next week. He said he's in no position to offer concessions to meet demands for fully free elections in the financial hub, but that Hong Kong government could offer a discussion on a solution within the framework of the decision of the National People's Congress Standing Committee. Search and rescue teams are still scouring Himalayan hiking routes this morning after a deadly blizzard hit central Nepal on Monday and Tuesday during the country's peak climbing season. At least 28 trekkers are reported to have died, most of them on the popular Annapurna circuit. Trekkers from Israel, Canada, India, Poland, Slovakia, and Nepal were among those killed. Some 50 Korean climbers were at their cabins when the storm hit, according to Korean news agency Yonhap. More than 220 people have been rescued so far, but many remain missing. The severe rain and snow appear to have been triggered by the remnants of Cyclone Hudhud that had wreaked havoc in India last week. Apple announced a few new gadgets earlier today, including 2 new smaller tablets, an iPad Air 2 and an iPad Mini 3. Both will feature the Touch ID fingerprint sensor, just like the newer iPhones, just in time for Apple Pay, set to launch in the U.S. starting on Monday. CEO Tim Cook said the iPad Air 2 at 6.1 millimeters thick is the thinnest device of its kind on the market. The U.S. tech giant also released a new operating system, Yosemite, and a new iMac whose screen boasts a resolution of 5K, which the company says has about 5 times the detail of a full HD TV.
We have an update today for iPad Mini as well.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Concerns over Korea's shaky economic recovery continue to grow as even exporters who have sustained the domestic economy during difficult times before are now struggling, and this is due to the persistently weak economic conditions being felt throughout the Eurozone. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Sluggish domestic consumption and investment in Korea have caused headaches for the nation's economic policymakers, but concerns over exports are about to turn them into full-blown migraines. Facing a slump in Eurozone economies, the central bank projects slowing growth in exports, the country's traditional growth engine, down the road.
It's a fact that the Eurozone economy is in a bad state because exports take up half of Korea's GDP. The global economy will, of course, have a massive impact on the domestic economy.
And the situation at home is not much better. Korea's facility investment in August dropped over 10% from the previous month, while overall industrial output sank 0.6%. In the face of such gloomy data, the central bank has lowered its key interest rate to a record low 2%. But experts say that will only provide a short-term boost in spurring investment, and that building a business-friendly environment is more critical.
Although local companies investing in overseas markets is inevitable, the government should work on improving business conditions to bring at least some of those investments back home.
Experts add that private consumption will only see a boost with the introduction of structural reforms that solve the mounting household debt problem and aging population. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, a new survey has found that nearly half of Koreans who work full-time jobs are so-called mobile workers. The poll by Microsoft Korea shows 45% of people who work more than 30 hours a week do not limit their work time to the office, but do their tasks on the move as well. Almost 95% of respondents said they own mobile devices, such as smartphones and tablet PCs. 4 out of 10 carry their notebooks and tablet PCs around with them at the same time, as most of them use their notebooks for their work and their tablet PCs for their downtime. A joint emergency response exercise takes place every year on Seoul's major Hangang River, but more emphasis was put on this year's, as it came exactly 6 months after some 300 people, mostly high school students, died in the Seoul-Ho ferry sinking. Helicopters, boats, fire trucks and rescue divers were dispatched to the scene of a staged collision of 2 ferries. This on Thursday. You can see the scenes there. Officials say it was the largest joint response exercise in 17 years. The main focus of the exercise was to save lives, and it was supposed to be completed in 21 minutes, but it only took 17. Around 1,000 people from 33 different organizations took part in the 1-hour drill. Private boat companies were included for the first time as well.
And TGI Friday, everyone, as we kick things off with the Incheon Asian Games, which ended earlier this month. Now, just as South Korea promised, the government is set to pay a portion of North Korea's Asian Games bill, with North Korea's total Asia bill coming out to roughly 750 million won, or $708,000. The South Korea Unification Ministry stated that it will pay the remaining 550 million won, or roughly $517,000. Park Soo-jin, the spokesperson for the ministry, stated that the money will be taken from the government's fund for inter-Korean exchanges, as most of the fees were broadcast and transportation-related costs. Meanwhile, the North paid 200 million won, or roughly $188,000, using US dollars for the food and accommodation at the Athletes Village. And shifting over to the LPGA KEB Hana Bank Championship, which is currently taking place here in the nation. And after the first round, a surprise leader as South Korea's Kang Hae-ji took the lead after the first day. The 23-year-old finishes off the first day of the event with 6 birdies and a bogey and shoots a 5-under par, taking a 2-stroke lead over 5 other golfers. Meanwhile, Park Geun-hye, who struggled a bit with 3 bogeys on the day, would finish tied for 15th at 1 under par, with teenage sensation Kim Hyo-ju tied for 21st at even par. And now moving over to some Thursday night's KBL action, the Ulsan Mobis Phoebus hang on to beat the Seoul SK Knights 74-64, while Cheonju KCC Aegis took on Incheon AT-Line Elephants. So let's take a look at the highlights. Now a tight game from the start as Incheon takes a 21-20 lead before KCC rallies back to take a 47-40 lead going into halftime. But a big game from Chung Young-sam and Ricardo Powell as the two combined for 50 points in the game as Incheon rallies back in the second half to take this game 89-84. Well, this time over to Thursday night's KBO action, with Samsung Lions benching most of their starters. They lose to the Kia Tigers 7-5, but a must-win game for the SK Wyverns as they faced off against the Tusan Bears in Seoul. And going into the game here, bottom of the first inning, Kim Hyun-soo, that's an RBI ground out to first base as Tusan takes an early 1-0 lead. Third inning, more from Tusan, this time Kim Jin-hyung infield single scores Chung Soo-bin before Kim Hyun-soo singles home on another for a 3-0 lead. But not done yet, Hong Sung-in this time, this one a 6-4-3 double play, but the runner scores from third and SK in trouble, trailing 4-0 after 3 innings. But SK bats come alive, scoring a run in the 5th inning before tying it up with 4 runs in the 6th as this game goes to extra innings. Now SK Wyverns would score twice in the 10th inning, keeping their hopes alive, but Tusan threatens in the bottom of the inning with the bases loaded and no outs. But SK manages to hold on and win 7-5 as the final playoff spot comes down to the final game. And now finishing things off with more baseball news, but over to the majors where the Kansas City Royals have advanced to the World Series for the first time in 29 years. Now the Kansas City Royals, who went from barely making the playoffs to going undefeated in the postseason so far, beat the Baltimore Orioles 2-1 in Game 4 to sweep the American League Championship Series. The Royals, meanwhile, will face off against the winner of the San Francisco Giants St. Louis Cardinals series, with the Giants up 3-1 in the NLCS. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. The entire nation is enjoying beautiful late autumn weather this morning, though it was quite chilly. Well, most regions woke up to the chilliest morning of the season, but single-digit morning lows are turning into a relatively mild afternoon, with highs a bit warmer than yesterday, marking at 20 degrees Celsius. So let's take a closer look at today's temperatures. Well, the low in Seoul kicked off at 8 and right now is at about 12 degrees Celsius and will rise to 20 later in the day, while Daegu and Busan will peak at 21 and Gwangju tops out at 22 this afternoon under lots of sunshine. Now for other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon will see highs of 20 and Dokdo peaks at 18 this afternoon. Well, weather should remain pleasant through the weekend, but on Sunday afternoon could turn into a cloudy one, and we have a nationwide showers forecasted early next week. Also, please do notice the big temperature gap between lows and highs and dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's going to do it for us for now. Have a great Friday and the rest of the weekend. I'm Mark Broome, and I'll be back with Ojin Ju at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.